All right, it's between me and the open bar. So in the spirit of Wikipedia, we'll do it together. So I'm very excited to be here. If you don't know me, my name is Moriel. I'm a principal software engineer at the Wikimedia Foundation. I do localization, front end. I'm an open source enthusiast and a systems architect. You can see here, I go to a lot of hackathons. You can see I'm in a hackathon because I'm sleep deprived, holding a coffee cup and trying to promote a poster, which is usual. In the spirit of DDD, I know that we need a roadmap. So here is the roadmap of the talk today. We're going to go over free knowledge, especially the movement, talk about Wikipedia, its emergent features, and then MediaWiki, the underlying software underneath Wikipedia. And then we talk about its platform as a product, exploring the architecture, some insights that we got, and what the future holds. So now you know where we're going, which is more than a lot of other processes that we do in architecture. So hopefully this is helpful. So we're going to start with open and free knowledge. Do I have here anyone from the FOSS, open communities, open and free knowledge? Give me a woo. Is there? Yes, I see hands. Woo, woo. All right, so the open and free knowledge is a movement. What you see on the screen here is the Wikimedia vision. Imagine a world in which every single human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. Open and free knowledge is a movement that believes that every human has a right to access knowledge and to share knowledge. So you can see that the word is not just consume knowledge, it's share knowledge. It's the idea that the knowledge should not be centralized. The knowledge needs to be shared by culture, accommodate different viewpoints, and be accessible to the world, both to consume and to share. And everything that Wikipedia stands for comes from that. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about, the emergent features and how things came by, keep this in mind, because this is what a lot of the things are meant to do. We provide a platform for free and open knowledge. That was the point. So let's talk a little bit about Wikipedia, if my slide will switch. There we go. So Wikipedia, the open encyclopedia, I'm assuming a lot of you know it, but let's see how much you know of the underlying things behind it. So how did it start? Well, in the beginning, in 2001, Wikipedia started. Now, this actually is not the original logo, but I'm simplifying a little bit for everybody. So Wikipedia started, and it started as basically a lot of people editing together article text, right, together to share encyclopedic knowledge. And someone said a while back, I think the previous CEO of Wikimedia said that Wikipedia is one of those things where, in theory, it wouldn't work. Like if I would come to you now and said, hey, let's create a website where anyone can edit and it'll be great and accurate, you'd all laugh me out of the room because how would that work? And yet in practice it works. And it's this kind of thing that just found its balance and works out. And so communities came and started kind of editing Wikipedia, and they saw that it's great. And so a community also formed to say, you know what, if we have an encyclopedia and it's free and look how great it is, how about we also have a dictionary, a free dictionary? Same style, we all edit it together. And so Wiktionary started. Same software, domain expanded now. Instead of just the Wikipedia, we have Wikipedia and a dictionary. And then we had more communities come and form. And now we had Wikisource, which is kind of like a Gutenberg-style project. Wikibooks, Wikiquote for sharing quotes. Each one of those expanded the domain. And then we said, well, we need a place for free media, for freely shared, free licensed media. And so Commons, Wikimedia Commons started with right now it holds almost 90 million files, all freely shared. And all of it, the software had to expand, and so the domain expanded. And then we said, well, we're coming into the future, how about we do structured data with graphical kind of like representation in a data model? And so Wikidata started. Again, the domain expanded, and all of these have its own communities that started wikis of their own, with their own workflows, with their own kind of set of data that they add and they edit. And while all of this is going, also we have multiple languages for each of those. And each one of that is its own community. And so that's how it started, and this is how it's going. We ended up with about 11 sister websites. Each one is its own community. Each one has more or less 400 languages, 300 languages. Again, its own communities. And all of those are operated by a single software called MediaWiki, which is the underlying platform. So when we talk about Wikipedia, we put the socio-technical in socio-technical, and I'm going to tell you how. I know that we can talk a lot about kind of like socio-technical systems. Well, Wikipedia not only relies on user-generated content, which makes it very much socio-technical, we also rely on user-generated workflows. So the workflows of the system are also user-generated. As I said, each one of those communities is independent. They produce their own workflows, and those workflows can change between the size of the wiki. Some workflows for the English Wikipedia, for example, is very big, and it requires different type of workflows for something like the Czech Wikipedia, which is a lot smaller. And so each one of those wikis, there's also different in kind of cultures. What do you define as kind of like how do you write the articles a certain way and whatever? All of those are dictated by each community with its own rules. And so with a software perspective, it's kind of difficult because not a lot of things are common. There are very common things, but not all of them. And a lot of the workflows are separate. And this idea that anyone can edit comes from this idea of free knowledge. Anyone can edit. It's an inherent right to be able to share information, but we need to make sure that you share valid information, and you need to make sure that you share information that is cited. And so a lot of those workflows come afterwards as moderation, as to fight anti-spam, fight disinformation, make sure that there's cultural representations, which is why there's a lot of those workflows that formed that make Wikipedia what it is. And so it's really disruptive to disrupt those, right? So if we do something to the software that maybe changes the way that people work, and all of those people are volunteers, we risk getting Wikipedia to a state where suddenly it's harder to fight vandalism or it's harder to fight disinformation. So all of that is a really delicate balance. And you can say Wikipedia itself is an emergent feature, but we also have emergent features in general within it, and I'll show you how. And also, and this takes us also to the kind of like a different type of socio-technical. We have upticks in both editing and reading when news cycles happen. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. But when, for example, a few years ago, Michael Jackson passed away, half the world went to read Wikipedia, and a little less of the other half went to change is to was in Wikipedia to edit, right? And so this relationship between a lot of people are editing now, and in terms of technical stuff, they're busting cache, right? Every time we edit, we need to reparse and bust cache, and then we have a lot of reads right now, which is requesting. This relationship can create some very, very heavy problems, and back then, we did struggle a little bit. Today, it's a lot better. We updated some of that stuff, but these relationships and these kind of technical stuff are really, really, really things that we are keeping in mind and are things that we have to keep in mind when we think about how to update the system and upgrade the system and do any sort of changes. Another thing is Wikipedia's edge cases. So we know that when we develop software, we say kind of like, all right, we have the domain, and we have things that are edge cases. And the edge cases, we can kind of come and say, well, if it's an edge case, maybe we'll treat it a little less, or maybe we'll see. The problem with Wikipedia is that the edge cases aren't very edgy. So let's consider, for example, very long articles. Very, very long articles with a lot of stuff in there that takes a long time to parse or to load. In the large scheme of things, there are not that many of them. So the vast majority of articles on Wikipedia are either short or medium sized. So the very, very large ones are not very large, a lot of them, which you could consider as edge case. The problem is that the ones that are large are the ones that everybody comes to read. And so you can't really treat them as edge cases, because those are the ones that everybody comes and have a lot of eyes on, which is partially why they're so big. And when you deal with more than 300 languages, both in reading and writing, a lot of things that people think of edge cases happen that are not edge cases. Things like supporting right to left and left to right, and sometimes a combination of both. Uncommon fonts, some of them not in Unicode, that we have to make sure that are supported. Different typing mechanisms that sometimes we need to use an inline keyboard for. Also, storage limits are interesting when you have languages, because, for example, if you limit your storage with bytes, well, English and Latin in general, that might work. But Hebrew, for example, uses 2 bytes per character, so that would be half of the text that they can store. And Chinese uses 4 bytes per character, so they would be able to store a quarter of the length. All of those sound like edge cases and maybe a lot of other cases, and for us, there are millions of people who use them, and we just can't afford to treat them as edge cases. Another thing is the widespread device support. So our goal is to make sure that everybody has access to information, no matter where they are, which means that we really, really need to make sure that no matter where in the world and what kind of device you use and what device you have access to, you can at the very least read Wikipedia and do basic editing on Wikipedia. Those are the 2 things that we really want to commit to doing in order to make sure that it's equitable. And so there's a lot of devices that a lot of companies nowadays are kind of like, well, you know, they're a little old, we won't support them, and we need to kind of take those into account. Potentially not for all features, but definitely for some of the basic features, the ones that we really want to be very conscientious when we choose them. And lastly, I talked a little bit about the traffic spikes. So a lot of times we treat traffic spikes as edge cases, but for us, traffic spikes happen when news cycles happen, which also means that all the eyes are on Wikipedia. So if the traffic spikes, we only treat them as, it'll happen rarely, exactly on the time that they happen is when the news will happen and everybody tries to get in there. And so when we develop new things for Wikipedia, when we say we need it to be performant, the mix here is not just we want the page to load fast, which we do. The mix here, we need to make sure that whatever we develop will not drop Wikipedia when there is a traffic spike. And the traffic spike is usually both editing and viewing at the same time in cycles. And so let's talk a little bit about the emergent features. As I said, Wikipedia itself is an emergent feature, I think. I don't know if when Wikipedia was launched, anyone would have guessed that it would become what it did. But there are a couple of things that I think would give you an idea of kind of the challenges that we're encountering. And the first one is Wikitext. Wikitext is our markdown language, or markup language. And you might ask, why are you using your own markup language? Why aren't you using Markdown? And that's a good question. The answer is, Markdown did not exist when we started Wikipedia. We had to build our own, right? And this also was built in an emergent fashion. Users started editing Wikipedia and then wanted to make links. So we started building these capabilities into Wikitext. And then images, and then tables, and then all these kind of things. And it just kept being more and more and more and more elaborate to allow for a lot of the stuff that you're seeing on Wikipedia. So you're looking at the page, obviously in HTML, that's what the browser is sending over, but what we're storing in the database is Wikitext. And so we need to have that parsing step, and that can be costly. And so we're relying very, very heavily on cache. But when people edit a lot, so if the same page is being edited over and over and over, and now needs to be reparsed over and over, that can produce a little bit of a problem. The next one is kind of stemming out of Wikitext. So what users realized is that they want to reuse stuff, right? Like they write things and they want, for example, to have blocks of notice or whatever and use them in other pages. And so templates were born. Templates are basically Wikitext pages that take parameters. And so they take parameters, and nowadays they can also have pretty elaborate if cases and quite a bit of code. Also, nowadays we're not just using Wikitext for them, we're also using Lua. But the idea is you can embed another Wikitext page into your article, and it's with some parameters, and then reuse it. Now, the complication here is that each one of them needs to be parsed, because they're all in Wikitext. Of course, we do have some, intermediary parsing and caching and stuff, and it's not all of it constantly reparsed. But templates can also be hierarchical, so that it could be like a base template, and then on top of it some other templates. And if you edit a template that is used now in 10,000 other pages, it will reparse 10,000 other pages. And so we're encountering a lot of these things that came from kind of like bottom up, and now are producing challenges that are technical and we need to deal with. And lastly, I'm just making sure there's no one standing, right? Everybody make sure that you're sitting, because usually when I introduce the next concept, people need to sit down. So let me introduce you to user scripts. So I don't know if you know this, but if you go to Wikipedia and you register and you have your own user page, and if you go to your user page, there's a space in there, ends with .js. common.js, where if you put JavaScript in there, any JavaScript, we also have jQuery, so you can refer to jQuery, but if you put JavaScript in there, it will execute on any page that you then see in as long as you're logged in. Any JavaScript. I will let it sink in. But it gets better. One caveat, just to get your heartbeat a little down. Any page that you are on Wikipedia, it will run for you, for the user. Accept your preferences, just in case. We still have some security measures. But any page otherwise. So you can do really cool stuff like I want to, I don't know, mark up a lot of like specific sections in the page just for me. I want to, I don't know, like have another button because this is a really cool workflow that I'm doing and here's a button for me. Now the cool thing about this is if someone made a user script and it's really cool and good and I want to use it, I can also load their script and have it run in my user space. And so now you start having not only users doing their own thing, users sharing scripts around. And another thing that we can do with this is if an admin, usually the community votes on these things, so they decide together that there's a script that is really good and they all want it. An admin can move it into the wiki, and now it will be enabled to all wiki users, not just to the users that loaded. And there's a lot of really fascinating things that users have made with these kind of scripts that really, like, some of them became actual features later because they were incredible, out of the need to continue supporting Wikipedia. But it does create a challenge here. Some of it is a little bit of a security challenge and issues. Of course, we do have some measures, but it does create that challenge. But what else it creates is that when we add a feature, the interaction with current other features might not be very obvious to us as engineers in the system because some of those features are added on, tacked on as these user scripts that we might not be completely aware of because 900 communities have random ones. And so this is something that, again, it's kind of like this balance when we add things that we need to, a lot of times, take a look and see what we're impacting and how do we help our users run their workflows in a way that works for the system and for them. So let's talk a little bit about MediaWiki. So MediaWiki is Wikipedia and all of the wiki's underlying software. It is an open source monolith for 23 years. Absorb that. Think about what that means and what that code probably means and looks like. Look, it not only works, it works and it's performant and it is very good with the upticks, but it is a monolith. It is in PHP and JavaScript. We have a very good and large volunteer developer community. And there is a concept here between core and extensions. So we have MediaWiki core, the core software and the core platform, and we have extensions. But there is no a concept of bounded context at all. Like extensions are just extension of a code. What will be included inside core through those years was mostly decided by whether it's important or it should be shared between most wikis. There was no really clear domain idea for core versus the extensions. And in fact, we are also serving this as an open source software that you can install yourselves and have your own wiki. And in the tarball that we're serving, there are base extensions that we consider core functionality, but they are not in the core software. So this idea between core and extensions is not always very clear. We do have heavy loads. We have about 30,000 database writes per second, and we're heavily relying on caching. And so when we develop features, there's always this balance that we need to look into. So from a user's perspective, they have workflows that are all per wiki. We have 900 of them, right? It's very, delicate balance here. But from the system's perspective, MediaWiki is a single software that runs on all of them. So we do have extensions that could be optional, so only run on several wikis, but still you have a very delicate balance here to figure out how to develop or how to allow for things that might be distinct between the different applications of the same platform. It needs to be very configurable. And so from the user perspective, workflow disruption is very risky. If I have volunteer editors whose job it is and passion it is to make sure that things are valid on Wikipedia, that they go around and make sure there's no disinformation, and they have their workflow that they're used to. If I come in and I disrupt this workflow, it's not even about, whether they're angry or not. I might actually disrupt here something that makes Wikipedia Wikipedia. I might actually disrupt the preserving of good information. And so we have to do things in incrementally, careful changes. And then the resiliency to this uptick on news cycles means that we have to have resilient and performant architecture and stability during these edge cases that are not quite edge cases upticks. And so you look at that, and you're kind of like, all right, well, so how do you modernize like that? Well, carefully. So what we've been doing recently is we now are taking this platform more purposefully. And we're really looking into the MediaWiki platform, as a product. And so this is Birgit Müller, our director of product, presenting kind of design goal. This is still in the process of, she's building kind of like the design strategy, the product vision. And so she's presenting, enable the creation, moderation, storage, discovery, and consumption of open multilingual content at scale while protecting the privacy of its users. Now, a lot of this already existed. If you go into the MediaWiki page about MediaWiki, you'll see a lot of that. But some of it got diluted a little bit over the years because there was no real focus on what is a platform versus all of the other things it needs to do. So these ideas between, the difference between product and feature and the platform, all of these things were really muddied. And so we created product leadership for this. There's an engineering group now that's dedicated. There's now a design goal and vision. And we're trying to transform this monolith into a product, so more purposeful. And of course, from the architecture perspective, we're trying to understand current architecture so that we can identify how can we move forward here. And there are cultural and technical shifts. Our users and our engineers, we all got used to something very specific. We sometimes might need to pivot, and we need to do that in a way where we get buy-in from both staff and our users to not disrupt their workflows. We can't, rewrite things very quickly. We can't stop development. We can't shift massively. This is Wikipedia. We have a lot of people coming in. There's a lot of stuff that we really, really need to be careful in doing. And so it's really challenging to think about this architecture. And so we kind of worked on this product architecture symbiosis, which is a very big thing also in DDD, right? And so in the product perspective, there's a lot of stakeholder interviews. The design goal is being written. There's a product vision that is worked on. And from the architecture perspective, we're trying to map the platform and figure out, like, OK, what are we dealing with? We're trying to identify current patterns. And where are opportunities to start evolving? And this thing is going back and forth because the architecture work is also informing product work to see what exists right now. And the product work is informing the architecture work. And this is the type of thing that we've been doing in the past few months as we're building kind of like the opportunity to evolve the system. And so we started exploring the product architecture, the platform architecture. And that's where the fun starts. So we said, OK, we need to explore the current architecture to see, like, what are we even dealing with? Like, we have all of those challenges that we know. We know that we need to be very, very careful how fast we move. We also know that we need to be very purposeful. Where are we going? And while the product vision is starting, let's get a picture here about what's going on. And so from the operational context, we need to understand what we have and help product navigate the definition of the system, because there's a lot, while they're talking to a lot of the stakeholders, we also need to understand kind of like, what is it actually doing on the background? What do we define as core? What is core behavior? As we said, there are some extensions that might need to be in core because they're core behavior. There's something in core that maybe not need to be in core. Like, what are we looking here? And so my first mission, attempt number one, was take the software code, right, and map the software components into user-driven workflows. And so the optimistic goals, as you can see them over there, is to kind of say, all right, here's the code base, and we have this piece is kind of like for this workflow, this piece is for this workflow, et cetera, so that we can kind of identify maybe the bounded context here, or kind of like components and stuff like that. And so, all right, let's see how that worked out. So the first thing is that these are the workflows that I received. Some of you may recognize them as potentially capabilities. We call them user workflows, but they are kind of capabilities in DDD parlance. And so I was like, all right, we're going to take those and we're going to start seeing how our code kind of maps into those and what we can see. And do we have kind of, a way to map, and where are we? Where are we starting? And of course, immediately, I thought that I'm going to kind of open a door and have this jungle, and I'll have to navigate through the jungle and figure it out, and then maybe have holes that I need to stay away from. Instead, what kind of happened is that I opened the door and there was a brick wall. Because what are components? Was my first problem. There are no real component definition in the system. I talked to a lot of their engineers, and we looked at the code. And a lot of the engineers gave me a definition of components, and they did not agree between themselves. We started saying, are we going to treat classes or components? They're not components. What are you talking about? It was really, really difficult to kind of figure out, okay, great, I need to map stuff, but what am I mapping? Where's my components? And a lot of the stuff are kind of all over the place, and it's an open source system, so a lot of it is kind of reaching in, ball of mud, as we say, and so it was really hard. So eventually, we kind of had a conversation, and we decided that we'll give it a start with what we call the maintainers list. So on MediaWiki.org, you can go and look. There's a list of pieces of the code, kind of areas of the code, and who is maintaining them. And we're getting into kind of Conway's law a little bit. It used to map more directly to teams. Nowadays, it kind of depends. Some of the stuff are actually individual people that know best about them. Some of them are volunteers. But it is a list of areas of the code. There are boundaries of ownership, at least, if not of code. There's no, there's grouping by behavior. So if anything, I can kind of start from that at least. So of course, there are some outliers. So for example, API is not a single component, clearly, even though it appears there on the top of the list. All right. And, authentication and authorization, which is also on top of the list, is also probably not a single component. But bag of stuff, all of that kind of thing, benchmarker, all of these things, we can kind of treat them as conceptual components. At least, if we have nothing else, it's a good start. And so that's what I did. So I took that list and literally copy-pasted it into a table. And then I added, I don't expect you to be able to read this. Just look at the colors and the way that the ticks are organized. I'm going to share the presentation, and you can go and click that link and look at this marvelous table for yourselves. But the idea here is that each one of the rows is this component. And then each one of the columns is the workflow, the capability. And we were trying to say, OK, this component, what does it fit into? And the first thing that happened is that there's a whole bunch of them that don't fit into any single one of those. And so at the very, very edge there, I don't know if you can see, but there's double question mark, which is what I added as whatever. Which is what we did. So we went over all the components, and some of them were and some of them were multiple, and some of them were partial, and some of them were both multiple and we kept on going. It was just, and some of them we argued about it. And so this was, the second challenge. The direct mapping was just not working. It was, most components do not map directly to user workflows, or they map to more than one user workflows, or partially map to multiple workflows. It was just all over the place. The good thing about this is that it started a lot of really interesting conversations. And I think in this thing, it was very, very useful. It started conversations about why are these things multiple? What does it mean that they're multiple? What does the capabilities mean? All of that kind of stuff was really, really useful. But in terms of modeling the system, actually looking at what it means, it wasn't very, very useful. And we realized that one of the challenges that we were trying to come at it from kind of two angles that don't really work out. We were trying to do the holistic thing of kind of the capabilities by mapping the kind of bottom stuff with the code that isn't really breakable. And so this outside versus inside view just clashed and just wouldn't fit. And so instead, we said, all right, how about we go into just holistic mapping? We just look at how the system behaves, and then later we can maybe map back into the code if we need to. But let's take a look at how the system behaves. And so that's what we did. The second attempt modeled the system behavior by use case. All right. So now we needed to go in and say, OK, for each one of those capabilities, let's come up with a couple of use cases that we can actually look at and model. And that's what we did. This is just an example. So for the edit, we have unregistered users editing a page, unregistered users editing a template, all of that kind of stuff. And then for consume, we have unregistered users viewing a page, and then registered user viewing, all of that. So we had like a list of kind of like use cases. We said, all right, we're gonna take a couple of those, and let's see what they are, how they behave. Familiar? Hello, event storming. I don't actually expect you to be able to read any of that, but you can look at the shape and appreciate this is one use case. And I'm going to go over it in a minute. And so now we're in the DDD realm. And so we said, all right, we're going to map behavior, not code. We're going to mark the areas of interest. And then we're going to look at 3 example wikis, because we have 900 of them. We're not going to do that. Or 11 types, right? We're not going to look at all 11. It's going to take forever. Let's look at 3 wikis. And we went with English Wikipedia and German Wikipedia. The idea was to see, behavior-wise, is there a lot of difference between the languages? There is some difference, you're going to see. And Wikidata. And Wikidata, as I pointed out before, is the wiki where we store structured content. So it has a radically different way of treating information. It has a radically different way of the way that you edit. It's not like free text. It's items that are related to one another. And so we wanted to see the platform supports all of that, where things kind of like go in and out and what type of stuff are supported. All right, so that sounds simpler. So, of course, challenges. Well, the first challenge, our use cases are kind of complex. And this was a little bit of an, I don't know if it's, there's a lolsob kind of concept, the emoji that kind of like both cries and laughs. That was me in that. So we started with unregistered user editing content. That's straightforward, that's great. Hang on a minute. What's unregistered users? Because we have a new concept now that we're working on that anyone can edit. You don't have to create or register in order to edit. So you can edit when you are unregistered. However, when you do that, the system shadow registers you in background, okay? But it's not fully registered. It's just a thing to make sure that we don't show your IP and that you have some capabilities and all that kind of stuff. So it shadow registers you. And so you're not considered a fully registered user. You're considered a temporary user. Are we going to model both cases or only one? And then we talked about it, and we saw that it's going to split up quite a bit. And we're like, all right, let's go simple. OK, so the use case now became unregistered, not yet temporary user editing content. Cool. All right, let's start. Wait. What content? Am I adding a new page? Am I editing a whole section? Am I moving sections around? Am I editing a template? Am I editing a JavaScript page, a JSON file, a Lua? Each one of those would split it up. And we're like, all right, come on, let's go simple, okay? No. Wiki text, existing wiki text, fixing a typo, tiny. Cool, all right, we can model that. Wait, where? Desktop, mobile, through the API, through a tool that you don't even know uses the API? Okay, let's simplify. On desktop. So this ended up being the use case. I don't know how happy Birgit was to see this, because it started as a very simple and straightforward one. Unregistered, not yet temporary user, editing an existing Wikitext content, fixing a typo on desktop. And what we ended up, and again, you don't have to read all of that, but just take a look at how elaborate this is with all of those conditions in it. And I can tell you that even with all of those conditions in it, at some point I had problems, even with this very, very strict one, in Miro, in my swim lanes. I had to move them around because it was so elaborate that the arrows didn't work out. And I was like, oh my gosh, if we didn't have those conditions, I don't know if just physically I would be able to fit this in a Miro anywhere. I would have like a 4D Miro somewhere. And so that was a challenge. We ended up representing what we could, right? Kind of like, all right, let's take a look at like the simplest thing ever. Another challenge is that the user-driven workflows are not distinct. Aha, what does that mean? Well, when you edit Wikipedia, what you can also do is go and see the history of the page. And so you edit Wikipedia, you add something, you remove something, whatever, we save it as another revision. And what you can do is similar to Git, you can go and look at the diff, right, at the difference between revisions. And you see something like this, like two columns, what changed between one to the other. All right, is this a consume capability, a patrolling capability, or an edit capability? You see, I can just go and read that page because I'm curious to see the changes. That's a consume action. I'm just reading it. All right, well, I could also do that because someone vandalized the page, and I want to revert that action, and so that it would be a patrol action. Okay, I can also do this because when I tried to edit, someone else tried to edit at the same time, and we had an edit conflict, and I'm looking at what I need to fix. So now this is an edit capability. Which one is this use case? I don't know. Another example, if all I did was click the button edit, and all I did was just see the editor come to me, the editor just loaded on the page, like that. Is this action a consume action because I'm literally having HTML and JavaScript being presented to me, loaded? There's no editing done yet. Or is this an edit action? What are we modeling here? And the difference would be, am I modeling the system process? If I am modeling the system process, it's simpler. It means that when the editor loads, it's still a consume action. The edit action, the capability, is only when I click save and the backend is kind of like doing all its thing with the wiki text and whatever. And this would be kind of simple. But if I'm modeling the user intent, the kind of capabilities based on user intent, it's a lot more conceptually correct because yes, the capability to edit means that the user can click a button and get an editor, which kind of conceptually that's better, but it's a lot harder to kind of figure out, okay, so that means that all of that components of load assets for me are not necessarily consume anymore. They might be a mix between consume, edit, and everything else. And now then we need kind of like a baseline capability. And so all of these things we have to really think about. And kind of negotiate. Now, none of that is wrong answer. It just really depends, what am I modeling here? And what am I looking at? And what kind of answers do I want to get? And what would be the most useful for also my product lead to look at the system and make conclusions about what that means. And another challenge, I'm sure none of you encountered this, come on. Yes, balancing holistic analysis and ambiguity and inside an engineering context. We had a couple of talks about this, I think, this time too. It's really, really difficult to snap out of the very, very specific, especially for an engineering context. We have a lot of focused experts who know very, very specific things about I can't say components, but areas of the code. And when you talk to a lot of them, because they're very knowledgeable, and you talk about them, okay, but what does the system do? It's really hard to snap them out to a little bit more higher level so that you can do that modeling. And so that was just hard. It was a challenge. And this balance of this holistic versus specific. So the way that we mitigated that is that all of the mapping sessions had at least 3 to 4 engineers. One would be an expert, and then all of the others are either a non-expert in that area or juniors, which was also really, really good to get people into, kind of like the code. And then myself as a facilitator made sure to concentrate on the actions of the system, so kind of elevate everything up, and be the one that starts with kind of like, I have a stupid question, why does it do that? To let everybody feel comfortable to also challenge one another. And this was really, really great because a lot of the non-experts would come in and say, wait a minute, is the system not doing X? And either the answer would be, actually, no, that's a good question, let's talk about it. Or, oh yes, I forgot, that's right, but it's supposed to be in another area of the code that I didn't think about. Okay, but it is doing this, right? So we ended up elevating a lot of those conversations from the specific upward to the holistic. All right, so challenges conquered, kind of. What about the insights that we got? You can see all the text here. No, you can't. Okay, I'm giving it to you just to see shapes of stuff. Don't expect to read this. Again, the slides will be shared. You'll be able to go over this a little bit. But the idea here just to show you some of the insights that we got. So you can see the swim lanes that I have are at the very, very top is Wikidata only, okay? Underneath it, and the only reason it's this order is because I just could not get it into another order with all the arrows working out, okay? So underneath it is everything. MediaWiki does it all the time, no matter what, okay, as the platform. Underneath that is MediaWiki only does it for Wikipedias, okay, so not wiki sources, not wiki quotes, only Wikipedias. And underneath that, it's the difference between German and English. And you can see over there that there is something that only German Wikipedia has. So there is some differences between even the wikis themselves. And so I'm going to show you one aspect here. And again, you don't have to read all of this. I'm going to tell you a little bit what it says. But we're going to take that, and we're going to examine this, because this was one of the cooler, I think, kind of insights that we had. And so this one is the action, decide what editor to display. And so when you go on any wiki, well, let's say Wikipedia, for example, right, and you click edit, the system then needs to show you an editor. And we have several types of editors. We have a visual editor. We have a wiki text editor. We have a JavaScript editor, a JSON editor. We have a whole bunch of editors. And so which one does it show you? It needs to think, right? It needs to see. And on Wikipedias, a lot of it is, okay, what type of content are you going to edit? Sure. But also, what did you decide in your config, on your own preferences? But also, what did the wiki as a whole, as a community, decide for its own preferences? Because there are community decisions about what might be the default. And then the user can override them. So we treat what is the wiki config, what is the user config, what type of data. There's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to happen to say, OK, I need to load this editor. But in Wikidata, it always loads the same, the editor is only related to what type of information you're editing, because the editor is not a full text thing, it's basically items that you're editing. And so it just depends what type of item you're editing. And so it overrides the system, it has a separate code completely. It overrides the system, it loads, it decides what editor you're gonna get on load of the page. Wikipedia decides what editor you're going to get on the click of edit. But all of them are kind of the same behavior. So does it need to be separate? So there were questions that were added here, right? Like, the action is done for all wikis. All wikis need to decide that. But the code and behavior is kind of split apart between all various places. Did we just find maybe a component boundary? Can it be abstracted? Can we think about what kind of thing the platform needs to do, and then other features can tack on? So this was a really interesting find. And then we started asking questions. Is there a reason why there's a load late versus load early? Turns out, not really. It was just when people worked on this kind of thing, they said, OK, it just makes sense to load early versus late. Can we consolidate that? Is this done for more than one wiki or most of them? Yes, absolutely. Are there other wiki with this? Does this give us an idea of potential component boundary? Potentially, yes. And so these were kind of insights that we saw. And the really cool thing is that it also got us a lot of buy-in from those engineers, because they are experts in this field, and they saw it, right? Like with their own eyes, of kind of like, oh, this thing is doing the same type of business logic. Why is the code over there and over there? Why do I need to maintain 5 different things? Or why is there another team that maintains something that actually should be the same? So this was a really cool revelation. Another thing, again, do not expect you to read all of the stuff. I just look at the shapes and the way that they connect. And you can see already that it's kind of like messy, which is basically what I want you to see. And so this messy thing is the publish operation. You click publish, and then what the system is doing. So you finished editing, now you click publish, now what? Well, turns out there's a lot of what. But it's also split up in really weird ways. And so the platform is in the middle, and up and down. It's kind of like Wikidata, but also the Wikipedias, and they're all seven. You see the green ones are user operations. And there's actually one over there all the way to the side. You can see kind of like a black one over there a little bit. That one says user gives up, which is great. It's kind of like, because some of them goes in circles and some of them up and down. And so we have these kind of things. These are the same operation, except it goes one way in the platform and goes overridden and with a completely different thing in Wikidata. And the other, the red one, shows where the user clicked edit. It's kind of, there are different things that are done, that are shoved in. Some of them are external things that are kind of like reaching into core and kind of touching runtime operation. Should it be that? I don't know. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Now, there's A lot here. So the first thing that we realized is that we really need to delve deeper into this thing. Like this is not a component boundary here at all, but it's very much a complication here. And a lot of people realized how complicated this is because of that. And I did a nice little animation to show you all the stars. Those are our notes. And so this was one of the ones that had a lot of notes. Also, what you can't see here is that some of the people like wrote those kind of like, and some of the people discovered Miro's ability to add comments. And so these are not the only notes that we have here. There's also like comments in there, like people arguing amongst themselves. And it is really useful to start seeing like, where is the complexity here? There's an opportunity here to delve deeper, to make sense here about what's going on. Can there be opportunities of finding components here, of patterns that are deeper here that can shed light on how we can make this more modern and better? And also, what do we do to maintain all that mess? Because that is one of the most important operations we have. It's the publish operations. Is everything here properly maintained with a maintainer? The answer is not always. And that is something that is also useful for us to know. And of course, more cases. And again, you're not supposed to read all of that. Just take a look. So the first one is kind of like user editing highly active discussion talk page. This has to do with notifications. You can see a lot of kind of like stuff happening in the middle, which is where the system has an idea of what to do, but everything else is jumping in to telling it, actually, don't. Aha, I have a different idea of what to do, which is very fascinating and very cool. And another use case at the bottom that there's a lot of green notes in there, which I love, because we're still working on kind of like figuring this out, which is registered users editing existing wiki text content, fixing a typo through the Action API, which is another use case. And so we're continuing to do that. This whole thing about the symbiosis, right, between kind of like figuring out the product, making sure that we have a proper definition of what we're doing with this platform so that we can find bounded context and how to, the domains of the function, of the platform versus everything else. All of that, we keep on going, probably keep on going for a while. So, what does that mean for the future? Well, we are still working on the technical and cultural shift here. There are changes we want to be able to make, and we need to make sure that we're doing them with buy-in that means that we're not disruptive to the actual actions that make Wikipedia what it is, right? We're continuing the product and architecture symbiosis while we're still, we're trying to figure out how to get a product vision here. We're leveraging annual planning. So while we're doing long-term stuff, we also have annual planning stuff. And there's a big challenge to say, all right, well, architecture it's not, next month we're done. It's not like a year thing, a quarter, and we're done with that. How do I fit this ball of mud architecture into like an annual plan? And so we are doing scoped experiments toward figuring out where can we insert patterns of modularization, both to show that it's possible and then start integrating it, and to check if it's possible, and then maybe find other ways. So we're kind of leveraging the idea of kind of like annual planning versus, right, the long-term vision. And so this year, for example, the use case that I showed you about user editing a talk page, what that does is send notifications around. And notifications specifically, the system is also its own tiny little platform because any other feature needs to be able to connect into the notification system to create a notification and give it its conditions and whatever. But the notification system in MediaWiki is actually split up between core. Core has some sort of notifications and an extension called echo notifications that was added a whole bunch of time ago. And the reason why they're split up is actually not a valid one. We looked at it. The reason why it was split up is because when the extension was written, it was really hard to do things inside core and so whatever, so it was created as its own extension. And there was a lot of conversation about maybe we need to put the entire notification extension into core. Of course, if it was me, I would decouple rather than put it into core, but we're still talking about how to do that. So one of the things that we're going to look at this year is we're going to look at that as an example of exactly the type of trouble that we're trying to modularize, and see if we can have an opportunity here to basically fix all of these kind of things to get to modularization of the platform. And so, summary, well, evolving Wikipedia is a complex thing. It's socio-technical, it's an open source monolith, our edge cases are not edgy, we have a shift in culture, and we need to really, really be careful, really disrupting editor workflows. But we're doing it, and we're doing it with a lot of DDD thinking and a lot of DDD methodologies. Thank you, and I think we have a little bit of time to questions, 10 minutes. I don't want to, there's beer outside.
Yeah, but I think we can do 10 minutes, right? Now, how great is that to get insights into the behind the scenes of a product we use every day, right? So I'm sure there are questions. Do we have the Cube microphone?
There are questions already.
No.
Oh, it's coming. It's coming. There we go.
There it is.
All right.
Perfect.
The plushy Cube microphone.
So let's start at the front here.
Thank you. Just a question about taking everyone on your ship aboard. So how do you manage to make sure that everyone is ready for the shift?
Okay, that's a good question. And that's something that we are very careful about. I think the main thing is explaining and sharing the process with everyone. I think that we are taking everybody with us with the process. So it's not something that one department is doing and everybody is following. We're doing it together. We're sharing with our users. We're doing a lot of conversations back and forth. A lot of the modeling was not just me with a couple of people going. It was very much shared. It still continues. There's invitation for other people to come in, a lot of it. So you take with you on that process, and that causes two things. First of all, for me to learn to say, oh, I assumed one thing and now I'm learning a different way. But also you take people with you, and then they're with you in this change. When they thought they can't change, they're with you with it. So that's how you kind of, you take them with you. And in some cases, you need to explain. So there are certain things that we are talking to our users, and we're basically saying, we understand that your workflow is this. We want to keep it. Here's our challenge here. What can we do for you to be able to kind of contribute back and forth? We want to give you this workflow, but it means that Wikipedia will crash when the next celebrity dies. That's not good. They understand that. We understand that. How do we do it? And we work it out. And there were several cases where we worked it out with them. A lot of stuff with Wikitext evolution, that there are features in Wikitext that sometimes we had to take back from them. Because, look, we saw that it's too much. And so we work with them, and they're not aside to the process. They're with you in the process, and that's how you take them with you.
Yeah. And who made the first impulse to start?
What do you mean?
When this whole transformation started, just for my understanding the process you went through, who did the first impulse to say, okay, guys, we need to do something about it?
So this is a process that's been a few years now.
Okay.
We had, actually some of them are probably here. We had a architecture thing, I see systems architecture thing. Before that, we had a kind of like a process. Is Kate here somewhere? Hello, Kate. Is Diana here somewhere? So we have some people who worked with us in the past and were part of this process. It was a process for several years. Now I think, and that's another thing about how to take people with you. You couldn't just do it with a flip of a switch. Hello, we're now moving. Slowly learning about things, planting the seeds, watching them grow a little bit. Also for our own staff to move forward. So this was several years now. It's kind of like moving towards this change.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So someone was here.
Thank you so much for the talk. You mentioned that you were doing scoped experiments for modularization. What does that look like? Like, how do you define scope, or give an example if you can?
That is a really good question, because that's something that's exactly I'm thinking about right now as we're defining them. So what we're planning to do with the notification, so we chose the notification system because it was an easy way for us to say we know what the problem is. We don't really know what the solution might be, but we know what the problem is, at least, right? So we chose that. That's the first thing. There's a lot of other spaces where we know there is a problem and we don't know what it is. So at least we choose something that we're kind of like, all right, we're kind of comfortable, we kind of know. And now, so the first kind of like half of the next year is going to do with kind of two prongs. One of them will be to continue mapping. So we're going to deal with modularization, so kind of the hooks and the extension registries, like how things hook up into the system. We're going to map it. We're going to try and see if there's like, what is this and what is it being used? And as a side thing to that, we're going to start exploring, okay, if notifications were modular, what would it look like? What does it mean? Why can't it be? So start like with just experiments, with the goal of finding at least like a pattern to be able to implement in the next half year, right? So we're doing this half year with a scoped goal of finding one thing to be able to do actionably for the next half year and then keep on going. And that's what we're trying to do.
All right, okay, thanks.
More questions?
Oh.
So how you were saying that you are in a transition period from like the legacy code to the new code. How do you handle that? Like, okay, you model it in the new way of doing things. You have the plan. You write the code in the new way. But then how do you make sure there is like feature parity between legacy and new code, and you don't actually break the existing stuff?
So we cannot do complete rewrite to a new code. There are certain things where we might be able to do. So this is part of the work right now, to identify, are there certain things where we can say, okay, we're going to transition from that to here's a new thing. But for the most part, Wikipedia as a whole, as a platform, we can't really say, okay, here's a new platform and we slowly move, exactly because of this like idea of feature parity. So what we are doing, we're trying to evolve in place, and that is very hard. But that's what we're doing. And so for that, we're identifying kind of like the pieces of what piece can I evolve not in place? Can I just switch this to another one? And then the feature parity is a lot easier because you have something that's a little smaller for that, right? Like, because otherwise, we just, with the way that Wikipedia cannot stop working and the way that we need to be very, very careful not to disrupt patterns and workflows of users, it's going to be very, very hard to do kind of like unexpected feature parity between 900 wikis that we have if we write completely new code out of scratch. So that we're not doing. We're doing kind of like in place.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Ah.
Thanks a lot for this nice talk. I have kind of two questions. The second one is a really small one. First, pardon my ignorance, why? Like, if it works, right? The golden rule. And the second is a small one, tech stack will stay the same, PHP, JavaScript, Lua. Thanks.
Why? Well, it works, but we're looking at the future right now. First of all, it works with caveats, okay? It is really hard to maintain. So at some level, you can say it does work, but it doesn't also work. We have a lot of stuff that we want to say, like we need to better maintenance. We need to make sure that we own it better, and it's really hard when it's like a big thing. It also, there are challenges with feature development. We have like, you know, something that the users requested in terms of blocking, like a new way of blocking. It was really tough because it's such a ball of mud that we almost couldn't ship this feature because everything touched everything else. So it works, is true in terms of Wikipedia to the user works, but in the system we are encountering trouble if we want to continue adding features and move into the future, which we have to. Things are changing, right? Like, the internet does not consume the information the same way. People on the internet do not consume the information the same way that they did 20 years ago. And they probably won't 20 years from now. And when we look at Wikipedia, we want to make sure that from now until forever, right, it's relevant. And in order to do that, we need to start thinking about, like, what does that mean for content? What does that mean for sharing? And it cannot stay stale. But we can't modernize without making it a little bit more modular and making it. So that's kind of like the circular thing. And the other thing that you asked was tech stack. I mean, it depends. Right now, we're not planning to change tech stack. PHP is great for us. It's working. Lua is for the templates. It depends how we modularize, right? Like, we do already have a couple of things that are services. And if there are services, some of them are in Go, some of them are, like, it's not, once you modularize, there's a conversation to be had. I don't think that it's probably very smart to go, like, all over the place with all the languages. You'd still want to keep, you know, the language of the main language of the software. So odds are we're going to stay PHP, but there are cases where it depends what you do. So the tech stack is probably going to stay the same with some caveats. If we need something very, very specific that works in a very specific way, we will be probably open to that if there's a reason.
Let's give A big round of applause to Moriel.